She thought a gate and a badge made her untouchable. She kept speeding through my entrance, shredding calm and pocketing power. I recorded every attack, built evidence, and set a trap she never saw coming. Stay till the end, the moment she pays for everything is worth every second, guaranteed. Welcome to HOA Justice Real Stories, the place where truth hits harder than rules. We'll continue the story soon. But first, tell me, which country are you watching this from? Comment below, I want to see how far this story travels. The neighborhood had always looked peaceful from the outside, neat lawns, quiet streets, and smiling neighbors waving from their porches. But beneath the surface, it was a war zone of egos and control. And leading that unspoken battlefield was one woman everyone feared, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, Karen Hollingsworth. Her reputation was infamous. She ran the community like her personal kingdom, patrolling the streets with her clipboard, counting trash cans, measuring grass height, and leaving violations like she was handing out candy. Everyone had learned to keep their distance. Everyone, except me. When I bought the old ranch-style house at the edge of the cul-de-sac, I wanted peace. A quiet place away from the chaos of my military past. I built my own gate, added security cameras, and kept to myself. But to Karen, my independence looked like rebellion. She didn't like not being in control. And from the day she saw that gate, I became her new project. It started small. Notes left on my door. Unapproved modifications. Non-compliant fencing. Unauthorized structure. She found something new to complain about every week. I ignored her, at first. But soon, she escalated. The first time she sped through my gate, it was by accident. Her SUV came flying down the street, tires screeching, the front bumper clipping the corner of my entrance. I caught it on camera. She didn't even stop, just waved like it was some neighborhood misunderstanding. The next time, it was worse. She drove straight in, like she owned the place. My dogs went crazy, my security alarms blared, and she just smiled, pretending to check on a landscaping violation. That was her excuse every time. But what she didn't realize was, I wasn't just another passive homeowner. I had seen people like her before, people who used rules as weapons, power as armor, and intimidation as their language. And I knew exactly how to dismantle them. So, I started documenting everything. Every trespass. Every time her SUV crossed that boundary. Every note she left. Every fake inspection. My security system was my best friend, capturing high-definition proof of her harassment. By the third week, her behavior crossed the line. One rainy afternoon, I came home to find tire marks across my driveway, mud streaks leading straight to my garage door. The gate was still swinging open, bent slightly at the hinge. She had done it again. This time, it wasn't an accident. It was a message. The sound of rain on metal mixed with the faint hum of my security feed as I replayed the footage. There she was, Karen, driving through my gate at full speed, smirking as she disappeared out of frame. She didn't care about consequences. She thought she was untouchable. That's when something in me snapped. I realized this wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about principle. About standing up to someone who thought their position gave them the right to bully others. So I made a plan. I began by reinforcing the gate, not just stronger, but smarter. Steel core, hydraulic hinges, pressure sensors, and a hidden spike strip system I used back in my security training days, nothing dangerous, but enough to stop a vehicle dead without damage. The system would activate only when a certain speed threshold was crossed. At night, I tested it in silence. The gate moved like a living thing, smooth, controlled, waiting. By the time the next HOA inspection rolled around, I was ready. I knew she wouldn't stop. Karen thrived on confrontation. And if she saw something she couldn't control, she would push until she got a reaction. The neighborhood watched quietly as her war with me escalated. Some neighbors even whispered that she had gone too far. Others watched from behind curtains, secretly hoping I'd take her down a peg. And when that day finally came, the day she sped through that gate one last time, the entire neighborhood would witness what happens when arrogance meets consequence. Because this time, I wasn't the one who would regret it. I sat back that night, watching the footage loop on my screen, the glow of the monitors reflecting off the wet driveway outside. Karen had crossed my boundary for the last time. And what was coming next would make her think twice before touching anyone's gate ever again. The morning after the storm, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cold regret. The kind of morning when you can feel something brewing beneath the surface, waiting to unfold. I woke to the sound of knocking, not from my door, but from my phone notifications. My security app had detected movement. Multiple vehicles outside. I stepped to the window, coffee in hand, and watched as 3 HOA board members stood at the end of my driveway like they were about to conduct an official investigation. And at the center of it, like a queen bee surrounded by drones, stood Karen Hollingsworth. Her SUV was parked deliberately across my gate, blocking the entrance. It was her way of showing dominance, of letting me know she wasn't backing down. She had called in backup. The HOA had arrived with clipboards, measuring tapes, and that same smug energy that dripped from every violation notice they handed out. From where I stood, I could already see them snapping photos of my property, jotting down details, pretending they had authority to be there. It was a silent war now. No words, just actions. Every move I made was being watched, and every step they took was being recorded by my cameras. Within hours, I received a letter, official, printed with the HOA's logo, signed by Karen herself. Violation notice, unauthorized gate modification. Potential safety hazard. It was almost laughable. The same gate she had repeatedly driven through was now, suddenly, a safety hazard. Her hypocrisy knew no limits. But I didn't react. I didn't post online, didn't send an angry reply, didn't storm into their little meetings. That's what she wanted, an emotional outburst she could twist into a rule violation. I gave her nothing. Instead, I let her dig her own hole. Every time she passed by, my cameras caught her breaking her own HOA regulations, double parking, trespassing, littering on private property. It was like she couldn't help herself. She was so focused on catching me slipping that she didn't realize she was building my case for me. I spent the next few days compiling everything. Dates, times, footage angles, timestamps. Each entry was detailed, organized, and backed by solid proof. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was building a record that could take down the entire HOA board if I wanted to. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. Not until she made her next move. And she did, sooner than I expected. That Friday afternoon, the neighborhood got an email from the HOA. A new, emergency meeting had been called to discuss property security issues affecting community aesthetics. It was a coded message. The real agenda was me. They wanted me gone. As the sun dipped behind the houses, I could hear cars pulling up at the community center down the street. Karen's SUV led the lineup, headlights slicing through the dusk like a predator's glare. The meeting stretched late into the night. And when it ended, neighbors whispered as they returned home, glancing at my property, some shaking their heads, others offering small, sympathetic smiles. The next morning, I received another letter. This one wasn't a notice, it was a threat. Failure to comply with HOA standards may result in fines and legal action. But here's the part Karen didn't realize, I was several steps ahead. The unauthorized modification she kept referring to wasn't illegal. In fact, I had obtained written approval months earlier from the previous HOA president, before Karen took over. The paperwork was valid, signed, and time-stamped. She couldn't touch me legally. But she didn't know that yet. I wanted her to keep going, to overstep, to cross the line so publicly that even her loyal board couldn't save her. So, I stayed calm. Then, one night, it happened again. The sound of an engine, revving hard. Tires screeching on pavement. My cameras lit up in sequence as motion sensors triggered one by one. Karen's SUV, flying down the street again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Another HOA member followed close behind in a silver sedan, headlights cutting through the darkness. They were coming straight for my gate, again. But this time, my gate wasn't the same. As her vehicle approached at full speed, sensors detected the velocity. The hydraulic lock engaged instantly. Steel arms braced. The motion-triggered deterrent system activated, a loud alarm blared through the air, followed by bright strobe lights flashing from the posts. It wasn't dangerous, just disorienting. But to someone speeding head-on, it was terrifying. Her SUV slammed to a halt, tires screeching inches from the gate. The noise echoed across the quiet cul-de-sac. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on. Curtains moved. Cameras rolled. She froze, caught red-handed in front of the entire community. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. I didn't go outside. I didn't need to. My cameras captured everything, her face, her license plate, the panic in her eyes as she realized what she'd done. The next morning, the HOA inbox was flooded with complaints, not from me, but from neighbors who had finally seen her true colors. Videos circulated in local community chats. Her SUV's reckless stunt was now public knowledge. She had wanted power. But now, she was a spectacle. Still, Karen wasn't the kind to back down easily. Humiliation only made her meaner. Within a day, she launched a full-blown smear campaign, claiming I'd endangered the neighborhood with aggressive security measures. She twisted every fact, every clip, every detail to make herself the victim. But I didn't flinch. I was calm, collected, and still recording everything. Because while she was busy fighting in public, I was preparing something she couldn't spin, something final. Something that would make her regret ever setting foot near my gate. And by the time I was done, Karen's reign over the neighborhood would crumble, not with anger, but with evidence. The kind that speaks louder than her lies. It began quietly, the way storms usually do. No thunder, no lightning. Just a subtle shift in the air that told you something was coming. 3 days after the gate incident, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Not another HOA notice this time, this one was stamped from the county's civil office. A formal complaint had been filed against me for endangerment and non-compliance with neighborhood safety codes. Karen had taken it to the next level. She was now trying to weaponize the system itself, dragging local authorities into a personal feud she had started. It was a bold move, and it told me one thing: she was desperate. But desperation often leads to mistakes. I didn't panic. I knew better. Paperwork wars were her battlefield, not mine. So I called my attorney, handed over every file, every photo, every time-stamped video I had stored. The footage of her speeding through my gate. The proof of her harassment. The signed approval from the previous HOA president authorizing my modifications. I wasn't fighting her anymore. I was preparing to expose her. Days turned into weeks. The tension in the neighborhood grew thicker with every passing morning. Neighbors who once smiled politely began to whisper in driveways, their eyes darting between my house and hers. Some had seen the video, the night she almost crashed into my gate. Some defended her, saying she didn't mean it. Others had grown tired of her control and wanted her gone. The community was dividing, and she knew it. Karen's once iron grip over the HOA started to loosen. Board meetings grew tense. Members who once nodded at every word she said began questioning her decisions. She had turned what was once a peaceful street into a civil war of homeowners. But still, she doubled down. She posted public memos around the neighborhood, warning residents about unauthorized surveillance equipment and non-compliant security systems, clear attempts to paint me as a threat. She used HOA funds to hire a private inspector, hoping to find something, anything, that could discredit me. What she didn't realize was that I had already been one step ahead. The inspector she hired came by one afternoon, clipboard in hand, taking photos and pretending to be official. But my cameras captured something interesting: the man wasn't from any authorized county department. He was a friend of Karen's son, working under the table. By now, I had enough evidence to dismantle not just her complaint, but her reputation entirely. When the county finally reviewed the footage, they didn't see a homeowner violating safety codes. They saw an HOA president repeatedly trespassing, endangering property, and misusing her position. But instead of confronting her directly, I waited. Patience was key. Let her think she was winning. Let her celebrate the small victories while her empire rotted underneath. In the meantime, I quietly began reaching out to other homeowners, the ones she had bullied before me. Families who had been fined for small things like flower pots, paint colors, or improperly placed trash bins. They had stories, real, painful stories of her intimidation. I gathered them all. By the end of the month, I had a file thick enough to make the HOA board sweat. Copies of unfair fines, complaints, and meeting records that violated transparency laws. Karen had ruled this neighborhood for years with fear. Now, her own paperwork was becoming her downfall. And then, the meeting was announced. The special board session that would decide the fate of my property. A final hearing to determine whether my gate, and my so-called violations, were grounds for penalties or even expulsion from the HOA. She thought it would be her victory lap. The night of the meeting, the parking lot outside the community center overflowed. Dozens of residents showed up, more than the board had ever seen. Word had spread about the gate video, the complaints, the lies. Inside, Karen stood tall, her expression composed but her eyes restless. She opened the session with her usual confidence, listing off rules, citing bylaws, pretending she had the moral high ground. But as she spoke, a shift happened in the room. People weren't nodding anymore. They were watching her, silently. Waiting. And then, when my turn came, I didn't bring anger or accusations. I brought proof. I placed a small flash drive on the table. Inside it was every incident, every act of trespassing, every second of footage showing her reckless behavior. And when the projector lit up the screen, the truth filled the room in 4K clarity. Karen, speeding through my gate. Karen, on my property without permission. Karen, instructing another board member to inspect my yard. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, the queen of the HOA had no words. The board looked shaken. The residents, stunned. The illusion of control she had maintained for years had shattered right in front of them. The meeting ended abruptly. She stormed out before the vote was even cast. And by the end of that week, she was suspended from her position pending a full investigation. It should have been the end, a clean victory. But something about her expression that night told me otherwise. She wasn't done. There was a bitterness in her eyes that went beyond humiliation. It was personal now. And in the days that followed, the peace I thought I'd earned began to crumble again, slowly, quietly, like a fuse burning toward an unseen explosion. Because while I had exposed her to the neighborhood, she had one last card to play. And the next move she made would cross a line no one expected. The night after the HOA meeting was eerily still. No cars. No chatter. No motion in the quiet cul-de-sac that had become a battleground. But still, something felt off, the kind of silence that hums too loudly in your ears, like the world is holding its breath. By 2:14 a.m., the first alarm went off. The motion sensors near the side gate triggered a soft alert, just enough to flash across my monitor. I opened the feed, expecting a stray cat, maybe a drifting branch. But what I saw froze me. Headlights, dimmed, creeping slow. A familiar SUV. Karen's. Even after everything, after the humiliation, the suspension, the proof, she was back. But this time, she wasn't speeding. She was hunting. Her car rolled to a stop just outside my fence line. The engine idled low, like a predator waiting in the dark. She stepped out slowly, glancing around, flashlight in hand. Her body language wasn't that of a rule enforcer anymore, it was raw anger. She moved along the perimeter, tracing the edge of my fence, scanning it like she was looking for something to use against me. My cameras caught every frame, every step, every moment of her trespassing. And then, she did something that changed everything. She reached the gate control box, the one mounted near the entry column, and tried to pry it open. Her flashlight beam flickered over the keypad. Metal scraping. A frustrated motion. She was trying to tamper with my system. The gate, the same one she claimed was a safety hazard, was now the target of her sabotage. I sat in silence, watching from my monitor room as she struggled, unaware that the cameras above her were capturing everything, her face, her hands, the exact moment she damaged private property. And then, a faint spark, a short circuit from the control box she had forced open. She panicked, stepped back, and drove off into the night. By morning, the damage was clear. The access panel was cracked. The keypad, broken. My gate, offline. I didn't call her. I didn't even call the HOA. I called the police. For the first time, this wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was criminal trespass and property damage. The officer who arrived reviewed the footage. He didn't say much, just took notes, copied the recording, and promised to follow up. But I saw the shift in his expression as he left, a small shake of the head, the kind you give when something ridiculous finally turns serious. Word spread fast. By the afternoon, the entire neighborhood knew. Karen's SUV had been identified in the footage, and though she denied everything, the evidence was undeniable. The HOA board couldn't protect her anymore. She was officially under investigation. But instead of retreating quietly, she exploded. Within days, she began flooding social media with posts, accusing me of harassment, of doctoring videos, of targeting her family. It was chaos. Comments. Rumors. A neighborhood divided even further. Neighbors started taking sides again. Some believed the footage. Others claimed it was part of a setup. The quiet community had become a pressure cooker of gossip, resentment, and fear. At night, I could feel eyes on my house. Headlights pausing at the corner. Anonymous notes showing up in my mailbox, some supporting me, others warning me to let it go. But I didn't stop. I reinforced everything, new cameras, upgraded alarms, motion-triggered spotlights that turned night into daylight when anything moved too close. The more she fought, the calmer I became. Because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was documenting. Every social post. Every denial. Every false claim. I was building a record that would make sure when the final moment came, there would be no doubt about who was guilty. And that moment came sooner than I thought. 1 week later, another envelope arrived. Not from the HOA this time, but from Karen's lawyer. A cease and desist order, accusing me of defamation and malicious surveillance. It was a move of desperation, the kind meant to scare people into submission. But she didn't know that I had already filed my own civil complaint, armed with video evidence, witness statements, and police documentation. When the papers hit her mailbox the next morning, everything shifted. Her confidence cracked. Neighbors who once feared her began speaking out, openly sharing their own experiences, fines, threats, intimidation. A collective voice rising against the woman who had ruled their lives through fear. Karen's silence that week was louder than her accusations had ever been. Her SUV sat untouched in her driveway. Curtains closed. The clipboard, gone from the passenger seat that once carried it everywhere. The HOA board called for an emergency election to replace her. It should have been the end. A quiet victory after months of tension. But people like Karen don't fade out quietly. They burn on their way down. And a few nights later, when I thought the worst was finally over, the alarms triggered again. But this time, it wasn't motion near the gate. It wasn't even near the fence. It was inside the property. Movement, near the back porch. The cameras turned, auto-focusing through the darkness, shadows shifting behind the trees. And then, a figure stepped into view. It wasn't Karen. It was someone else. A man. Dressed in dark clothes. Moving fast. Avoiding the main lights. He reached the same gate system she had tried to tamper with, carrying tools, working quickly, like he knew exactly where to look. That's when I realized, she had sent someone. This wasn't just about HOA revenge anymore. It was personal, and it was escalating. The man worked for barely a minute before a burst of light hit him, motion sensors catching him off guard. He froze, looked straight into the camera, then ran, disappearing into the night. I called it in immediately. The officers arrived again, reviewed the footage, and confirmed what I already knew: it was no random trespasser. Someone had been hired. Someone sent by her. And now, the investigation that once revolved around HOA drama was turning into something much bigger. Because this wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about power, ego, and how far one person would go to protect their false reputation. And I had no doubt, the next move would be hers. Only this time, she'd be facing the consequences in a courtroom, not a cul-de-sac. The first real crack in Karen's story didn't come from the police report, it came from the whispers. In every neighborhood, there's always someone who knows everything. The kind of person who watches, listens, and remembers. And when the investigation into Karen's trespassing went public, people finally started talking. At first, it was small, rumors about her temper, her failed marriage, her obsession with control. But as days passed, those whispers took shape. A neighbor 2 streets over mentioned that Karen used to be part of another HOA, in a different community, one she'd abruptly left years ago. Another claimed she'd been removed from a homeowner's board for misconduct. It sounded unbelievable. But I couldn't ignore it. So I dug deeper. Through public records and old online forums, the picture became clear, and darker than I expected. Karen Hollingsworth had been at the center of 3 HOA scandals in the last decade. Each time, the same pattern repeated: she joined a board, seized control, alienated residents, and when confronted, she escalated into chaos, lawsuits, harassment, property damage, and finally, vanishing before she could face full accountability. She wasn't just power-hungry, she was addicted to control. And when control slipped through her fingers, she broke everything in reach. That's what had happened here too. I wasn't her first target. I was just the first one who fought back and didn't fold. The police investigation into the break-in started connecting dots quickly. The man seen on my security footage had prior ties to her son, a small-time contractor who had once worked for her landscaping company. The fingerprints matched tools found in her garage. The evidence was piling up. And for the first time in years, the predator was cornered. Karen tried everything to regain control. She emailed the HOA board pleading her innocence, claiming she was being set up. She sent letters to neighbors warning them about dangerous conspiracy. She even filed a counter-complaint against me, a last, desperate attempt to shift blame. But this time, no one believed her. Neighbors who once obeyed her orders now turned away when she walked by. The HOA board, once her loyal army, suspended her permanently and voted in a new president, a quiet, level-headed woman who made one promise: no more fear. Still, Karen wouldn't disappear quietly. The day the court hearing was scheduled, the entire neighborhood buzzed with tension. Cars lined the streets. Reporters showed up from a local outlet after the story leaked online: HOA president accused of property tampering and harassment. Her perfect image was collapsing in real time. Inside the courtroom, she sat rigid, pale, eyes darting toward every screen as my attorney presented the evidence. Every moment, from the first time she sped through my gate to the night she sent someone to tamper with it, played out on the monitors. The silence in that courtroom was electric. Even the judge seemed taken aback by the footage, by the absurdity of it all. An HOA president, sworn to protect property values, caught destroying one. By the time it ended, her denial shattered completely. The judge didn't just dismiss her complaint. He ordered her to pay restitution for damages and issued a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of my property. The gavel hit. The echo felt final. But what came next wasn't relief, it was reflection. Because as satisfying as it was to win, there was something tragic about watching someone destroy themselves like that. Karen had built her life around control, around being feared, respected, obeyed. And when that illusion fell apart, she didn't know how to exist without it. Weeks passed. Her house stayed dark. Her SUV vanished from the driveway. Her name was scrubbed from the HOA website. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt normal again. Children played on sidewalks. Neighbors smiled without glancing over their shoulders. The clipboard patrols had ended. But I couldn't shake one thought: why had she been like that? Why did she need to dominate everyone around her? One afternoon, while cleaning out my garage, I found a plain envelope slipped under the door. No name. No address. Just a single printed photo inside, a picture of Karen, years younger, standing in front of a burned-down house. On the back, handwritten words read, "She lost everything once. She's been trying to control what she can ever since." There was no signature. No explanation. I didn't know who sent it, maybe a neighbor from her old community, maybe someone trying to close a chapter. But it made sense. Behind every tyrant, there's usually a tragedy, a wound that never healed. Karen wasn't just cruel, she was broken. And her obsession with control wasn't about power, it was about fear. Still, understanding her didn't excuse what she did. She had crossed too many lines, hurt too many people, and turned peaceful neighborhoods into battlegrounds. And yet, as strange as it sounded, I felt a kind of closure. Because finally, she was gone, her reign of intimidation over, her lies exposed, her silence complete. But fate has a strange way of circling back when you least expect it. 2 months later, as autumn rolled in, I noticed something odd. A new SUV, unfamiliar, but eerily similar, began appearing near the neighborhood entrance. Parked for hours. Engine running. And though I couldn't prove it, something about the way it lingered, headlights off, facing the street from a distance, felt all too familiar. It was like a ghost from the past, waiting, watching. Whether it was Karen or someone else didn't matter. Because this time, I wasn't afraid. My gate stood tall, my security stronger than ever, and my resolve unshakable. Karen had tried to break me, but instead, she had reminded me what real control looked like. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about fear. It was about peace. And I had finally earned mine, for now. It's strange how silence can feel louder than chaos. Weeks had passed since Karen vanished from the neighborhood, and yet, her shadow seemed to linger in every corner, a faint reminder that peace in suburbia never lasts for long. The lawns looked greener, the mailboxes stood straighter, and for the first time in years, people waved at each other without suspicion. It was quiet, maybe too quiet. I thought it was over. Until one gray afternoon, I heard that sound again, the slow grind of tires rolling up to my gate. When I stepped outside, there she was. Not Karen, but someone new. A middle-aged woman with carefully styled hair, sunglasses too big for her face, and a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her SUV was spotless, parked at a sharp angle, just close enough to make a statement. The HOA logo gleamed on her polo shirt. She smiled, that rehearsed, plastic kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes, and slipped an envelope through the slot in my gate before turning away. Inside, the letter read, "Dear resident, we're conducting a routine inspection to ensure compliance with community standards. Please make sure all gates remain open during daytime hours for accessibility. Thank you. Acting HOA President, Linda M." A familiar chill crept up my spine. It wasn't just the letter. It was the wording. The tone. The arrogance hidden beneath the politeness. It was Karen's voice, reborn. I folded the paper carefully, placed it on my workbench, and stared at the gate, that same gate that started it all. The steel was scarred but strong. Every scratch told a story. I thought of everything that had happened, the speeding, the harassment, the police, the courtroom, the silence. It had taken months to rebuild peace, but only one letter to threaten it again. And in that moment, I made a promise. No one was ever going to walk, or drive, through that gate without respect again. The next morning, I watched from my porch as the new HOA patrol made its rounds. Linda's SUV moved methodically, stopping in front of houses, taking photos, scribbling notes. It was almost identical to the way Karen used to do it. The same hunger for power. The same need to control. But this time, I wasn't the same person. The old me would have waited. Argued. Collected evidence. Trusted the system. Not anymore. I decided to confront the problem before it became a storm. So, I documented everything. Every stop she made, every letter she sent, every notice she slipped into mailboxes. Then I reached out, quietly, to the very people who once feared Karen. And something unexpected happened. They listened. The community that had once cowered under her rule now had a backbone. They remembered what it felt like to lose their peace, and they weren't going to let it happen again. Within a week, half the neighborhood had signed a petition to remove the new, acting president, for overstepping her authority. The HOA board was caught off guard. They hadn't expected unity. They were used to silence. But not this time. When Linda tried to push back, demanding respect for regulations. People laughed, the kind of laugh that carries truth behind it. The kind that says, "We've seen this before." By the next meeting, she was gone, removed, replaced, erased. The new HOA president, a calm, middle-aged man named Rob, had one rule. No more clipboards. No more power trips. Just community. And for once, it worked. Months later, as summer faded into fall, I stood by my gate, the same spot where it all began. The air was still. The trees whispered in the wind. And for the first time in years, I felt like the neighborhood truly belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones who tried to rule it. But even then, I didn't take my peace for granted. Because I'd learned something powerful. Evil doesn't always wear a mask or carry a weapon. Sometimes, it hides behind a clipboard and a smile. Sometimes, it drives a luxury SUV and calls itself management. And sometimes, it just needs a gate that won't open. That gate, once a symbol of isolation, had become my protector, my statement, my boundary. It didn't just keep people out. It reminded me who I was. It reminded everyone what happens when you push too far. As the sun dipped low, the metal bars glowed faintly orange. A reflection of everything I'd endured, and everything I'd reclaimed. My property. My peace. My dignity. Karen had come here thinking she could control everything. Instead, she taught me how to take control of my life. And as night fell, I locked the gate one final time, not out of fear, but out of certainty. Because I knew one thing for sure. In neighborhoods like mine, peace isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes, it's defended. They say history repeats itself, but only if you let it. So when someone new tries to test your limits, remember. It's not about the gate. It's about standing your ground. Because the moment you stop letting people rush through your boundaries, that's the moment they start respecting them.